By the tears of the planets, you've done it! You've defeated every Joustus champion. King Knight, champion of Joustus through and through. Come with me. I have a new title to bestow. What? If you're to grant me an honor, then kneel before your king and deliver my new title here and now. King Knight, please. The unveiling cannot wait. Are you ready yet? Yes, reward me for my valor with a fitting title for a king. The first of many, I'm certain. Let us be off. From the depths of your heart, pray. Pray for love, pray for this planet, and pray for ours as well. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Shovel Knight King of Cards. Time for one of the big secret things. Oh, I recognize this background, hello. Have I transcended to some foul demonic plane? Unveil yourself indeed, conjurer! I'm still your friend. You're safe. This is from my own world, Chosen One. Our scholars foretold of you. A Joustus player who saves our planet and all who dwell on it from certain doom, with one fateful match. Cardia herself is the final boss of card games in this game. Now, what makes her rough is that not only does she have a pretty powerful deck, she has access to every single Joustus champion's boss power. So be it the total row wipe from Black Knight, the transformation of a card from Wona, the timer from Horus, or the digging away at a panel from the Spin Wolves, she has access to it all. You can beat her without cheats, but I'd recommend bringing in a Gem Thief and a Play Them All just in case. I hereby title you Hero of the Ancients. Come with me to my planet. You will save us in glory as our hero. Ha! What I'll do in glory, my two-faced friend, is rule with an iron fist. Unless your entire planet is prepared for that, no deal. What? How could you? A planet's worth of people. You'd leave them all to their fate? Simply reject your calling as hero of the ancients? Unless you're ready to become my servants, then I'm not interested. Return me to my kingdom at once. Impossible. After light years of searching, you would let my planet perish? I'll annihilate you from existence. Meet our super boss, who, I'm very partial to, given the entire fact that this entire area is a very big setup, not only to Final Fantasy, but the background especially is one to Final Fantasy IV, which is one of my favorite games of all time. Giga Cardia here is rough because, for one thing, you have no vigor in this fight, so you can only rely on your shoulder charge and twirl attacks. Her main attacks are to send Final Fantasy adjacent crystals out at you in different colors. Each of them will go in different patterns to try and move at you and then do an attack. For instance, the blue ones will send several projectiles that try to aim at your general location. Use the crystals to get on top of her and then do a couple of hits of damage before she swaps sides. Yellow crystals, once activated, become the rotating circle of electric orbs from the Phantom Striker boss fight, and they'll slowly start moving outwards further. But actively avoiding it is easier than you'd think, if only because the distance at which they're traveling by the time they're going at their full speed is pretty notable. The green gems are the 4 Orbs of Doom from certain Dr. Wily capsules. If you know, you know. Thankfully, though, they don't do any elemental properties, it's just pure damage. Best way to get around those, in my experience, is to move them a certain direction and then actively bait them towards you from there to try and jump over them, or at least slide under them. The fire crystals are probably my least favorite to deal with, only because they become a lingering portal of fire that drops down several fire droplets that spawn in fire waves that go both directions once they hit the floor that are the same height as you. Dodging one of them isn't too bad. When there's 2 or more, that's where things start to get a little bit iffy. The boss does try to pattern out the attacks in such a way where you have plenty of opportunities to actively get up to her to do attacks, but because of the one hit per heart mentality this campaign has, health can get kind of sparse in this fight. She still will drop the occasional heart after a couple of hits like with all other fights in the game, but I wouldn't recommend relying on those. Use King Knight's Healing Tears ability if you haven't yet, and hopefully remember to actually bring in a Decree of Rejuvenation, because those are the only sub-weapons you can actively use here. Oops. I didn't plan for that at all. Uh-oh. Honestly, once you start getting a lot of crystals in here towards the end of her health bar, she honestly gets a little bit easier, because it's easier to jump from one crystal to another to get up to her at the top sides of the screen. At the start, where there's only like 1 or 2 crystals per, reaching her at that point is kind of rough. She's not impossible, but she's definitely difficult. I would argue she's probably the hardest boss in the game, even compared to the final boss, just because of the lack of any healing or sub-weapon usage. Glad to know that people at Yacht Club Games really appreciate very good Final Fantasies. So how do we get back? That's troublesome. Oh, thank God. No prophecy could foretell this tragic development. I suppose I must venture to other realms to find our hero. I'd intended to give you this as a welcome gift, but I suppose it's no longer required. For beating her, we get the card crystal. Gives the location of missing cards. When editing your deck, check the undiscovered card filter to learn a card's location. So now you can find out where every card that you don't have in the game is, which particular duelist has it, whether or not it's in a specific level of a card pack from Chester and all that. I think they do try to give you the most convenient location of it, although there are a lot of cards that are exclusive to mystery packs. But if you see a card on this list that you know you saw in a certain other fight, you might want to go for that instead, just in case you prefer playing rather than the RNG of whether or not you actively get the card from a mystery pack. Now you'll be able to find the location of any Joustus card you desire. Farewell, King of Cards. I like that fight a lot, but because the reward is ultimately still tied back into Joustus, if you weren't feeling the card game to begin with, I really wouldn't recommend going through all the effort just to do that. Oh, I'm back, and well enough. I've had my fill of petitioners for the day. One planet is enough to rule. The nerve. So for beating her, we also get her standard Cardia card, a 4-count card with Slam, and Giga Cardia, 2-count card with Slam, and 2 bomb panels. Really powerful cards that I don't use, really. I do start the process of collecting more Joustus cards right now by buying a lot of lower tier mystery cards from Chester. And while, like I said, you can get a lot of cards from just standard encounters if you remember where you saw one. There are several that are unique to mystery cards, so you're going to need to do this eventually. The rates of pulling a new card are honestly decent, but just in case you do go for all the Joustus cards, prepare for a lot of repeats and dupes as you do so, especially once you get towards, like, 80+% completion on a given mystery pack, which you can tell just by looking at the far right side as you're purchasing them. I think by this point I'm averaging at least 40 to 50% on a given pack, but hey, that's just for now, and I do get them all. Although, just to get a little ahead of ourselves, I do most of the grinding for that off-screen, like I believe I already mentioned in the LP. With that said, welcome to our next level. This is the lava well. Care to guess what one of the major hazards in this level is? Water? You know what? I like the way you think. Of course, we're going to be dealing with lava and fire droplets falling from the ceiling on top of the usual rays of Liquid Samurai, though they do throw a new one at you that isn't really that threatening in the long term here because of the moveset we got. They do also throw several of the lava fish at you from Mole Knight stage, which they can be used as platforms as usual, yeah, but I feel like their intent here is to try and use them more like the up and down enemies from Mega Man, but it's just so slow and they appear so quickly, it's never a real threat for that unless you're super rushing. There is also, of course, platforms that actively fall the moment you step on them, which seem like they could be a threat, and they do a couple of puzzle-ish things with, but are never too bad. The latter half of the stage, though, does a remix on a mechanic we saw earlier in the LP. We got axolongles back, specifically one that move along a predestined path like that. But now, they trail behind them with fire, so you can use them as a platform, yeah, but you need to immediately keep on the move, otherwise you're probably going to take a dumb hit from just falling into a fire flame like that. Oh god, that was close. On its own, the mechanic isn't too bad, though it can definitely feel a little overwhelming with the amount you can have on screen because of that, because there was 3 of them on screen like there, for instance. But paired them with a pretty annoying enemy type, and these can be a surprisingly tough room to get through unscathed. I know on my first playthrough, I think I even took a silly death here because I want to say I got hit by the dragon, landed on the axolongle, recovered, then got hit by the fire and fell backwards into the lava or something along those lines. The last chunk of the stage is based on the ice skating mechanic from the Polar Night stages, and even then, even more so, the Bubble Toads from the one stage in the Triple Kingdom. This is a part that is honestly pretty easy in comparison because you could just do a pretty decent shoulder charge forward and then follow it up with a Bubble Frog. Something I remember getting into my head on my first playthrough of this stage in specific is for some reason I thought you couldn't shoulder charge into the side of ice platforms to activate the twirl state, but no, you can. I think my thing on my first playthrough was if I saw a tile that was atypical to begin with, I thought I couldn't shoulder charge off of it, just like it was the shielded tiles that you can't do that with in any given level to begin with. But no, if it's just not a shield tile, you can actively shoulder charge into it. You will be fine. I can see how I got into my head about that, honestly. But the game is overall very generous, and as long as it's not one of the shielded tiles, you are completely safe. Just be careful as you get towards the end here, because between the firefish and that dragon enemy, trying to platform on these thin ice platforms can be a little bit scary. Again, Bubble Frog can help a lot here. I actually don't know why I didn't equip a subweapon for this, but oh well. Worth noting, the difficulty curve throughout the Tower of Fate stages is actively a pretty consistent growing rate, which is largely because, get this, they got to place 3 levels right after the other and not to worry about player choice and which one they would go to first. So not only can they focus on multiple mechanics, they can actively grow in difficulty. Which leads to it being annoying in some regards, yes, because it's a notable difficulty spike once again, but I kind of prefer how they handle this to how they handle a lot of the individual 3 levels for a given area in the prior 3 kingdoms. Like, I don't think all 3 levels of a given aesthetic needed to be one after the other, but I think maybe you should have needed to beat the first 2 to get the third, or maybe after beating the first one, the second 2 would unlock in a chain. I don't know, am I making sense? I feel like I just would have preferred a little bit more of a consistency on that, I guess is the way to put it. With that said, welcome to our final normal level in the game, Warp Wrap Keep. This level is focused on the green walls and ceilings that we're seeing on screen right now, that when you enter one, you exit at the exact same place on the opposite side. This is, I'd argue, one of the hardest levels in the game, if only because, while this mechanic itself is pretty easy to understand, the sudden swap of spatial awareness can take a bit to get used to, and the level's long enough where you will get used to it by the end, but you'll probably take a lot of silly deaths along the way. Worth noting, when you're falling through the ceilings and floor version of that mechanic, you do actually, like, pop in for a second at the top to give you an idea of where you are, but that's also more to act as a more straightforward tutorial so you can figure out what's going on here. Because I imagine on a first playthrough of this, and maybe in testing for the mechanic in specific, if they started with the walls, people probably thought it was a hazard they couldn't touch for a second. So actively forcing them to encounter the floor and ceiling version of it gives a much better idea of what's going on here. When you're going through the walls, you don't have that second of pop in to give yourself a second to get adjusted. Which, honestly, is for the better, because this kind of mechanic feels better to me like this, like it's certain Mario 3 levels, but here we go. They do some pretty devious stuff with enemy placement along this, on top of metal placement, for that matter. But largely, what really helps here is the Battery Brigandine, because it gives you a second to charge up not only a better dash, but also to kind of analyze what's around you and then have it ready to go at a moment's release rather than a moment's press, which, at least for being specific, letting go of a button in a section like this feels a little bit more responsive than pressing the button, if only because you don't have to worry about the input being dropped in the case you're having issues with that, or the rare stutter frame happens like that if you're playing on PC. You know what I mean. It's nice to have that little preparation going. A big thing with this stage, I would say, for figuring out the platforming mechanics is you do need a bit of patience to see where platforms lead and all that as you get further in. But that's not exactly assisted by the latter half of the level's focus, and I'll just leave it at that for right now. Worth noting, though, we do actually have another version of the Griffith fight coming up here. Once again, just use the turncoat, and you'll be able to kill that thing in 2 shots, more than likely. But because you have to worry about the warping mechanic on top of the wind, it can be a little scary, because if you get pushed off that platform over there by the wind, you're probably going to fall right onto the spikes to the left of the platform. So either take your shot and miss, or actively try to just overshoot the spikes by holding left to begin with, like so. Resisting that wind will only really get you killed. 1, hit 2, thank you. So, the reason I say patience is good but won't help you to an extent in this level largely has to deal with the room above us. Like pretty much every version of the Tower of Fate, we're gonna have our notable large vertical auto-scrolling segment, which isn't too hard on its own, but when you have to factor in warping and waiting for platforms to move from one side to another, like the ones that are on screen right now, there's a lot of times in this auto-scrolling segment where the floor, the death pit floor is inches below you, and it can feel really uncomfortable. You can stay ahead of the fall to a good extent, but I'm not exactly sure what rate the level above us technically spawns in at, or at least is interactable with. So, trying to take your time here, while nice and dandy for learning the memorization of the area, can potentially be a death sentence, I won't lie to you. This is definitely the hardest bit of platforming in the game, which makes sense. It's also the last bit of real platforming in the game, considering what the final levels in the campaigns tend to be like if you've paid attention to the LPs thus far. But this is definitely rough enough to the point where I remember getting very frustrated with it on my first playthrough all those years back. I dislike this merit medal. Not that it's actively hard to grab, but the scrolling pit of doom below me just makes me anxious enough where I think I'm going to miss it, and that actively causes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy where I then miss it because of that, and yeah. Doesn't help that I remember dying to get it several times in my first playthrough, so just a lot of meh. They definitely saved one of their hardest levels across the 4 campaigns for last, I think is the best way to put it, which honestly, in terms of like difficulty, is kind of satisfying. But say if you picked up only King of Cards, it can definitely be a bit of a, whoa, what happened moment for the rest of the campaign. Once we're at the top of this ladder, though, we are home free, the exit ring's on the right, and we will now have access to the final boss. But I'm not gonna go fight the final boss just yet. I have a lot of Justice cards to go grind for, and there's also another limerick for us awaiting at the bar because we've reached our next merit medal milestone, so let's take care of that first. Ahem. And the towers all fell like rains in the spring, and when word reached the village, they cried for their king. But the king was alive in a terrible way, and the dust turned to dirt, and the green turned to gray. Ominous. So at this point, I am doing my Joustus card farming. The best way to do this in general, if it's ones you get from a mystery card, is to just do the first half of the first Tower of Fate stage and get the alternate exit, that's about 5,000 gold per, and do that until you just have all the cards. It takes a while, and I wouldn't even say it's necessarily worth it, but I would recommend doing it if that makes sense, especially if you're trying to just say you 100% at every campaign. Worth noting, to access the undiscovered card section, you do need to access the filters, which are accessed with the start button on the top right, and then you can check what cards are missing from there. For me, the final card I needed was Mole Knight. All cards collected. If you've collected every single Joustus card, head to the bow of the Glidewing. A little surprise has been arranged in your honor. For getting all 148 total cards, they add a little celebratory thing at the bow, and you also get an achievement in all versions of the game / feat. Though notably, you only get an individual feat for it if you're playing the individual version of King of Cards. Largely, you only get a feat / achievement for the overall campaigns at very specific groups of achievements, effectively. It's a lot of effort to go through that, but thankfully, it's not the worst. For getting all cards, when we go to the bow, there's now this giant blue thing that's meant to frame something else we get for getting all the merit medals, so we're almost there. And just to showcase how long all of this took, let's take a look at my file select really quick. Let's look at the backup save I have of before I started the grind. 6 hours, 18 minutes, 43 seconds. Decently long game compared to the other campaigns, like I said before, roughly double the length. Afterwards, we are at 7 hours, 41 minutes, and 43 seconds. So over an hour just of card grinding. Not hard, but definitely time-consuming to the point where it feels tedious. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 17, we go wrap the campaign up. See you guys then.